And greetings and salutations and post Happy Mother's Day. I was reminded that it was 90 years ago yesterday, maybe not on the date specific, but on the holiday, that Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, our two co-founders, were joined together by something much greater than ourselves, and this all began. And what we do is we celebrate. Fortunately, today, we are in chapter 1, Bill's story. Finished up with the doctor's opinion last week. We have a special guest appearance today. Liza wants to try out for the team, so we're going to find out how well she does. She said she loves Bill's story. Apparently, she knows him as well. Most of you guys know him. I've never met him at a meeting, but I take your word that he was in AA at one time. The doctor's opinion explained to us what was wrong with us physically, that we have an allergy to alcohol. It was a doctor's theory. It was interesting to us because it explained things that we could never otherwise account for. And what that looked like is not an allergy that you would have to poison ivy peanuts or strawberry. What would happen is we would take a drink, and rather than quenching or satisfying the thirst, it would create a greater one, and it would eventually become insatiable. But we went the distance and tried to satisfy it. And because we couldn't satisfy it, and when you consume enough alcohol, you get the effects of too much alcohol, which is called drunkenness and blackout, and a whole lot of other things that go along with it. Over time, we ended up doing absurd, incredible, tragic things, not being able to explain ourselves, and then swearing off forever because the consequences of the last drunk were more than we could bear. We found out that the fatal nature existed in our mind even more so than in the body, because something inside of us always compelled us to take the first drink, no matter how bad or needed to stay away from it it was. So what we're going to do is get a little history lesson from our friend Bill, who was coined the author of this big book, and just great instrument of God, an interesting story. What we do, Liza, is we read a paragraph or so, and then we discuss anything we have to say about it till about 45 minutes after the hour, and then however long they want to stay in and comment, they do so. Till they tire of us, we never tire of them. So chapter 1, Bill's story. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time, we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. So a couple things about this paragraph is we find when we study the history of Bill's story in other books that there was a lot of alcoholism. Not only did it run through his family, it galloped. And there was Uncle, I think, Warrow Wilson or Barrow Wilson. Some of them died of alcoholism. So as growing up like anyone else with any genetic predisposition, there were strong warnings of his people that a guy like him should watch alcohol because this stuff runs in the family. The fact that he was born, I think, in front of a bar or behind a bar, the fact that his family was involved in that, a lot of people had liquor in the family, but that is something like if you were warned that diabetes ran in the family, you'd want to get your sugar checked. My mom had indicated that glaucoma ran in our family, and at first I ignored it and said, wait a minute, she's giving me good information. So I had eye tests periodically and found out I was not susceptible to that, but it was good to know. So, and then lastly, before I bring Liza in to say something, it talks about Something happened in the Winchester Cathedral, and he's going to mention that 2 more times in this story. He walked into a cathedral and he was much moved. I believe that he had an experience of spirit there at that time as he's heading off to war, not knowing what it's going to bring. He's off in a different country and he probably had some fear, but something came that satisfied or gave him solace in that area, enough so that he remembered it. And isn't it interesting, as we look back, that he leaves this experience in this cathedral and he walks outside and he's in a cemetery and he goes to a tombstone that may be the foreshadowing of what his assignment in life was going to be, to come up with a way to recover from alcoholism. Liza?
Thank you, Bill. And also the chat. For those of you that are listening and aren't with us in this moment in a physical way, thank you for being here. There is some awesome information in the chat, and I appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. It is a beautiful service. I love learning. This way of life is the most amazing thing in the history of this program that I literally owe my life to. Is always so amazing to me. I wanted to add one thing in there because you touched almost on something that is beautiful, and that is the understanding of being prepared or informed about what is a genetic predisposition to stuff, right? The interesting thing about the time, of course, we have this amazing book and we have all these kinds of things that tell us what our different opportunities are by way of knowing the ism that's killing us by the time we get to these rooms in this book. But knowing that, or even being able to see what we now call alcoholism, the way that it was lived in the time before this book, and even when this book was first published, it was something nobody knew how to treat or do anything with, right? So that's kind of significant to be able to read through and recognize historically, like, yeah, not only was it something that we know he dealt with, but that it galloped, I love that word, thank you, through his family, right? Like, that's amazing. And even knowing that changed nothing, which is also very interesting. Okay, so 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceived their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. In these rooms, it's always so fun because I'm like, yeah, does that describe you? And we're all like, yep, 1000%, that's me too. And the beauty of this is like, yeah, 1000%, that's me too. And if this wasn't you, or there's another phase of things where you belong, but can see you in different ways in the same way. One of the things that we started this meeting with that you didn't get to hear, which again, thank you for having this meeting, is phenomenal, is the understanding on page 159 that when we get together and get to live and love and learn each other through this book and how we get to relate to life, that also includes every way that the ism that is killing me shows up. Some of which have different substances, some of which have different behaviors, whatever, right? The book tells us our behavior patterns vary, but guaranteed in one way or another, we're on these pages all over the place. Even the little slots that don't have your name on them, there's gonna be some that do, trust me. They do. I just happen to be really gifted and greedy and get to have all of them and notice them everywhere, which is another miracle. But yeah, all the interest that we have, all the money that's possible. They got rich, why can't I? All the different things, like we're everywhere here. Possible means I can do even better because I'm so special, right? I'll let you take the next one, Bill.
I just wanted to say it's interesting because Rob put some things in the chat giving us the history of someone who noted Bill Wilson's grades in law school. And I suppose if you have a life that's worth living or have lived anywhere, a lot of this stuff could be found out. My life would have been a dash. I did absolutely nothing. But the interesting thing about it is Bill was proving to the world that he was important. His entire life, when you read the history of Bill, was him always being an overachiever because he felt awkward, clumsy. Then a terrible thing happened where the girl that he was in love with early on in junior high or whatnot had died of a serious something happened overnight. She was dead. The announcement came over the school PA one morning and he was there and he was shocked. He went into a deep depression. And it talks about a boomerang, which he's going to use that word in the story that his grandfather told him only Aussies could make one. So he cut out some headboard of a very majestic bedroom set, but he finally was able to make a boomerang to prove that the Aussies weren't the only ones who could do it. In baseball, he went out of his way to become the number one guy in orchestra or choir. So, I mean, he was overcoming for something that was eating away at him from the beginning, which a lot of us have. And if you go back to the doctor's opinion, it says it did not satisfy us to be told we could not control our desire for liquor just because we were maladjusted to life. We're outright mental defects. We're in full flight from reality. I was like that long before I ever drank, and I could never satisfy it. I knew something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was. And had alcoholism been called something else and didn't need alcohol as one of the components, had someone described me in early life, I would have fit the description, and maybe my battle with booze would have not been so long because I could realize that alcohol was only one of the symptoms. And although it was a big symptom when I was drinking on the last day of my drinking, perhaps the only symptom and the one that would kill me, the other ones far outweighed it until I got alcohol because that symptom seemed to put all the other ones in remission, or at least gave me the ability to not care that I knew that there was something wrong with me, and probably everyone else knew that. Back to the story. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that this would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. We gave up our position and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had had some success at speculation, so we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. So it's interesting that he says the financial leaders became his heroes. Talks about in We Agnostics that what obscures us from this relationship with the power is pomp, calamity, and worship of other things. So maybe he was starting to worship other things, putting his reliance on things human. If I could only be like them, I want to be rich, I want to be successful. So what happens is we start to get these heroes in our lives, these things of worship. And I noticed that the word, it was brought to my attention out of drink and speculation. Speculation is another word for thinking. So out of drinking and thinking, he forged a weapon that one day would cut him to ribbons. Go ahead, Liza.
Thank you. If you are fortunate and are in these rooms like this and also happen to have a familiarity with Miss Lois, in her autobiography, this time is described and written about, and we have images in there too, of these days for them. And it's really interesting. You have an understanding of what it can be to be Bill, but then also what it is to be with Bill in a relationship and understand what is actually happening and what the reality of those things are. Back what I read before, we were talking about the conversations, right? Because of course the drinking wasn't continuous, then it was just a thing. And the excuse that Bill offered, or the understanding that he tried to give about why he was drinking, was, of course, that's how he attained his genius. That's how he sought and reached the place of where he got to be the guy that was the guy that did things, and then goes on to then become all the things that we're reading about here. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances, what a fun word, of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. I love that it goes from one thing with a deep explanation into the next with, like, yeah, I don't even have to give you a bunch of words here because you know this one well enough, right? Like the space of going from things are great, I've arrived, there's jazz, there's all these things that are glittery and shiny and distracting and wonderful, and I've achieved it all, and I have all of these people, go straight to, oh yeah, and by the way, now I'm drinking and things are crazy. I don't have those fair weather friends anymore. Those are all terminated, and I'm alone as a complete lone wolf in a place where everything is now full of unhappy scenes, even though this beautiful apartment is loaded with all of these wonderful things, and you would think it would be a glamorous whatever. The reality is there are a lot of scrapes, and even underlying those little last words of that paragraph, there's also an understanding that maybe if things had been different or his drinking was not to that degree, there might have been opportunities for some kind of infidelity or lack of loyalty, but because she showed up for him so consistently and he was often so extremely drunk, those scrapes were something that weren't even possible and kept him out of those, because his reliance on her to get him out of the positions that he got him in by way of how drunk he was already heavy that quickly. All right, Bill.
Yeah, I always thought remonstrances meant something else. Thought it meant like the relationships ended, but it was a forceful, reproachful protest. So the people were protesting, and one by one, which most of us do, we eliminate people from our lives, especially those that challenge us to look at ourselves or disagree with what we know that we know that we know for sure, even though it's not working and it's not valid. We know it, so it must be. And what happens is he becomes a lone wolf. My buddy in Florida used to say he was a real party guy till at the end of his drinking, it was porter, party of one. And then it's alcoholism, party of one. I'm the only one left because maybe, and I can't even stand myself. But no one else can long before I can. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud why I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. It was fun to carry him around the exclusive course which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape which bore the inscription XYZ minus 32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. Delusional, golf fever. Get an idea, watch something on TV or in real life and decide that I'm going to be a pro at it without putting in the effort, kind of like coming into Alcoholics Anonymous and being expected to speak at the World Conference and I haven't taken the steps yet or done anything. It takes time to take time. It takes practice to become good at something. Thank God from where Alcoholics Anonymous was 90 years ago to where it is now. The only thing that could sustain it was the grace of God. Bill Wilson was the longest sober person, at least in this movement at the time. And when the book came out, what did he have? 4.5 years sober. Dr. Bob's, maybe coming up on 4 years, and the rest of them a sprinkling of newcomers. So newcomers wrote the book. And just real interesting. You have anything to say about his little trip? And
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting because the understanding at the time, again, was that nobody could help us, right? Like nobody could solve this thing. Men would truly end up with wet brain and just be gone. And women in that position is oh my goodness, a whole other animal, right? First of all, we were never even seen that way. And if we were, it was the sanitarium completely, and it was just go there to die. There's no helping at all. So that he had that space of recovery coming and still not, right? The hope is that it can be helped, but not. And what's happening through the state of not continuous drinking, but still noticing this is where it's going to end up at some point. And everyone is gone. The money is gone. And now they're going to live with the parents. The time that we are accustomed to, and what it is, like Bill was saying, no matter how many years or whatever, no matter how many times you go through the steps, or every time you read the book or what it is that happens in that space, the understanding of, even back on page 3, when we're talking about the manual labor, right? The investment in all the things that's so short. We want it quick. We want it now. We want the freedom that comes from that, but we don't have the understanding from our perspective of those things. It's just mind-blowing how generous this program is and how much is in this book for us in such a short span. And since the pandemic, Zoom and each other in this way, what it gets to be compared to what they had access to. I am so grateful. Okay. We went to live with my wife's parents. I found a job, then lost it as the result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years, or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. Liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3, got to be routine. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by half a dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. The hanger-on part at the brokerage places, right? We're still going to keep reaching for those vestiges of fortune and hopefulness and the belief that we can pull it out yet again, because there have been so many examples where we've been able to, right? And he's telling us exactly our story again, like always. And then the luxury of what we had and what we were using to distract ourselves and run from the realities that we had created, to lie to ourselves and continue that lie. That luxury is no longer a luxury. It has to be something that exists in a way that is tangible and useful and applicable, or we're not going to make it. I can't be who I want to be in my mind and get to maintain the delusion that I am if you see the real me. So that's why no one's around at all. And even without that, I can't even face me physically, mentally, in any way, let alone spiritually, without the things I'm using to comfort and soothe me from the existence of just being me. And that we can make it, that we're scrappy, that we get through those things, that there somehow is always a way we can pull something out until we can't, right? So in the space of, yeah, the endless cycle of physically dealing with the repercussions of what's happening and what I'm doing, and how little soothing and comfort and relief and ease is actually in the property of using that, to now where at least the wife is a little bit hopeful because there are off and ons where it works. And I'm still able to pull it out a little bit. And what she's doing to work and earn the money and everything else is how we're sustaining it. And somehow that seems sustainable, right? We're in a place where that's still believable because at least, I'm not Evie. I'm not as bad as he was or is, right? I'm okay. There are people that are worse. I'm all right. Astonishing. That's it. Thanks, Bill.
Yes, indeed. So I just noticed he gets in a brawl with the taxi cab driver. Here's a guy who's sitting for law school. He's now caught up in the New York Stock Exchange and he's acting like a drunk. That's the next stage of this. He might not be in the throes of alcoholism yet, but he's heading there. He becomes an unwelcome hanger on in a place of establishment because that's what happens with drunks. We become pathetic, and although people love us for some type of good nature that they have, they don't want us around. Then it says liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. My old sponsor who just passed this week, last Friday, Larry Van Duzen, with 49 and a half years, talked about when he was substitute teaching. He said he had a little Maverick that was a car. He said it was a baby Mustang. And he said he'd have his drink before he went into class. And he said around 10 o'clock at break time, he had to run out to the car, get down under the steering wheel, get the bag out from underneath the seat, take a swig, get it down, and get back into class before anyone knew he was gone. He said that is not social drinking, but it's necessary drinking. And I want to say this, if no one objects, I'd like to pause the recording for a moment. We have down at Akron, Ohio, at Dr. Bob's house, a memorabilia, a lot of history. But what we